Now we're live. Hey everyone, my name is Louis, aka Louis the Frenchie Manette, and you're watching the Frenchie Watches. Hey, look, your eyes do not deceive you. We're on cam, and I got the one, the only, the sommelier of movies, Mr. Whitney Seibold. How are we doing today?
Very good. Thank you for having me on. It's good to be here in my underground lair.
Yeah, but I'm happy you can escape your little place to go deep inside your cave to talk about movies with me tonight.
Yeah, happy to do so.
All right. So we got a hell of a movie that I'm probably guessing if you're watching this podcast, you might have never heard. And this is why I wanted Mr. Whitney Seibold to talk about it because he's the only human on planet I actually know that actually knows this movie. So let's go on a journey of discovery. All right. First of all, this movie is directed by a Canadian boy, Mr. Panos Cosmatos, written by also Panos Cosmatos, and very interesting and very personally mind-blowing music by Jeremy Schmidt. Anyways, let's go into your thoughts. Before we go actually in your thoughts, if there's like one phrase you can describe this movie, like what phrase would it be?
Oh gosh. I'm trying to steer away from words like, head trip or freaky, because I think there might be something a little bit more subtle going on than just its style, but we can discuss that because a lot of people have reacted only to its style. I would call it hallucinatory.
Yes.
It is this weird kind of meditation on the way New Age religions were kind of having their last gasp in the 1980s. I imagine this was very much a reaction to L. Ron Hubbard and the rise of Dianetics and Scientology in the 1980s. I mean, Scientology has always been kind of an interesting, partly bugaboo, but always timeless topic to make a movie about, because so many big American movie stars have become kind of indoctrinated by the Church of Scientology. I guess I can get into the Church of Scientology. How do you want to start this discussion here?
You know what? I'm going free form, to be honest. To have you on is just such an honor. So I want to see where it goes. That being said, I just want to say the way I see the movie, like that 1-2 phrases, it's a psychological imagery and journey of a movie. The narrative is not exactly a 3-part, beginning, middle, end with an overarching story. It's a journey made with symbols and sounds, and the music as a character itself. And you have to be ready for that, because if you're not, you might just not get the movie. Like, a close friend of yours, you told me, just did not understand the movie. It happens because it's non-traditional. And
it's certainly non-traditional is a good way to put it. I just think just maddeningly slow is a good way to put it as well. The close friend you're referring to is my podcasting co-host and brilliant critic unto his own right, Mr. William Bibiani, who I fell in love with this movie when I first saw it, and I recommended it to him. And he says that every time he's tried to get through it, usually starts late at night, and he invariably falls asleep, just because there's something weirdly hypnotic about the movie. That's also incredibly slowly paced. So if you're tuning into something like Beyond the Black Rainbow with the idea of getting some kind of thrill, like if you're going to smoke a jag and try to get through some kind of freaky science fiction movie, maybe you won't be in the right state of mind. I think you really have to be open to the meditative qualities that the filmmaker was going for.
Oh, definitely. Like I smoked a J for this movie, but I knew what I was getting into. But no, definitely, it's an experience. It's after watching a couple of times, I still understand something new of it. And if we go parallel to things I've saw, like that was either inspired or not intentionally, but reminded me of. There was like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Solaris, the original one,
Yeah.
Stalker, Scanner, Andromeda Strain, The Man Who Fell on Earth, Altered States, Soylent Green, and THX 1138. There's a lot of like those 80s influence in it that,
Well,
I don't know.
those are mostly 60s and 70s movies that you listed there.
True.
And
Okay. True.
no, the filmmaker Panos Cosmatos, he's a little older than me. He was born in the mid 70s. His father was a known Hollywood film director who did films like, he did one of the Rambo films. He did Cobra. He did Tombstone. He did these kind of very mainstream appealing, very masculine blockbusters. And you can tell that Panos Cosmatos is really influenced not just by the movies that his father made. I don't think he's really influenced by the films his father made, actually, but he's influenced by movies as a form. As such, when you go into Beyond the Black Rainbow, you're not necessarily you're seeing a film student film. You're not seeing somebody who is exploring an idea and trying to figure out film as a way to communicate that idea. You're looking at somebody who has seen a lot of movies and is trying to recreate little moments. That's what Jean-Luc Godard did when he was making films like Breathless. He's taking bits and pieces and characters and ideas from other movies and remixing them in sort of a modern milieu. Take a drink. Whenever I say milieu, take a drink. There are other filmmakers that have done that along the way. I work for Quentin Tarantino. I'm a projectionist at his movie theater. That's what he does. I think it's safe for me to say that if you watch a Quentin Tarantino movie, he usually gives you a laundry list of scenes and music cues that he's taking from other movies and kind of remixing them in a stylish way. And I feel that's the same thing going on with Beyond the Black Rainbow. This is somebody who watched a lot of movies like Phase 4 and Soylent Green, and he's even admitted openly that one of the dream sequences was inspired by a 1991 film called Begotten. He wears his influences on his sleeve. And Beyond the Black Rainbow is going to be on your wavelength if you too are also into those movies. And I think, importantly, Beyond the Black Rainbow also manages to emerge as its own entity, even though it's very, very, very much of a piece of a kind of subgenre of really kind of psychedelic science fiction movies that was maybe not in vogue, but at least more of those films were being made back in the 1960s and 1970s, thanks to the popularity of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was a huge hit. That was 1968 that movie came out. And after that, you could see a lot of science fiction filmmakers starting to explore a lot more heady ideas. This notion that everything can be that science fiction means machines and technology can also be used to expand the mind and really kind of rip your brain open and introduce new philosophies. My mom likes to tell a story of how when she was a teenager in 1968, when 2001: A Space Odyssey would come through town, all of the hippies, armed with their marijuana, would wait outside the theater until intermission. And then during intermission, they would all sneak into the theater because that last part of the movie, all those like swirling colors and what have you, was all the hippies wanted to see anyway. So there was an element of psychedelic experimentation that was going on with cinema at the time. You look at, not just 2001, you look at El Topo and sort of the rise of the midnight movie, which began in 1971. All the way through the 70s, you get to stuff like Eraserhead. There's all these really kind of cult movies. Now, if you know the history of cult movies, if you know the history of El Topo in particular, it was this really bizarre acid western that was Alejandro Jodorowsky said that his films should be used the same way most people use acid. You shouldn't take acid. You should watch this movie instead. And a film presenter, a theater owner in New York, got a print of this movie, showed it, and didn't get any business because this is a weird film, this kind of bizarre acid western about this rogue cowboy who's wandering through this psychedelic landscape and getting into gunfights with these spiritual gurus and ends up taking up in a cave underground, and just full of all these. It's a wonderful film, and he realized that this presenter, that if he ran this thing after hours and, importantly, allowed the audience to smoke weed in the theater, then people would come to see this thing. And lo and behold, he showed it at midnight. He's opened the doors up to all of the stoners in New York and said, why don't you come see this weird, freaky film, El Topo? And it became a sensation, and hence the Midnight movie was born. The whole notion of going to see a movie at midnight. Of course, nowadays, theaters will program anything at midnight. It doesn't matter. But I think that kind of streak of rebellious outsider psychedelia that was really closely tied in with stoner culture is what a lot of what Panos Cosmatos was drawing upon to make Beyond the Black Rainbow. I don't know what sort of a weed advocate he is. He may have been one of those sober kids who was watching these really freaky movies and just getting really into it. I don't partake myself, so I'm just into this kind of freaky shit. But he's definitely tapping into a type of science fiction that was very much born of this need to explore and expand the consciousness the same way drugs were being used by the countercultures in the 1960s and the 1970s. It's kind of odd that these kinds of movies are still being made, because I'm not really sure what sort of culture Beyond the Black Rainbow is trying to be counter to. It is really just a pastiche at the end of the day.
But it's a necessary pastiche, though. It changed my view of seeing movies. It's the first time I saw, that kind of like mind-altering movies. My first experience, and if it wasn't for that, it might have been another movie eventually, like probably Rubber by Quentin Dupieux, which blew my mind. But you need those kind of movies once in or a couple in a generation to change that, even if it's small, even if it's just a few, change those people that are open to it and make them dream of other kind of movies. And you never know, they might pass it on and expand the idea. So it's important to have those kind of movies, I find.
Oh, absolutely. And there are some of us who are constantly seeking those kinds of movies and wish they would come along more often. I'm really glad that Panos Cosmatos has made 2 movies, and both of them have completely blown my mind. Because I love Beyond the Black Rainbow, and I love Mandy. Mandy is it's less of a pastiche. It feels more like Panos' own thing.
Okay.
But it also, like Beyond the Black Rainbow, deals with this notion of the failed cult. Now, when the movie came out in the early 2010s, this idea, I think the Church of Scientology, and we'll get back into Scientology now, was kind of crumbling. A lot of the secrets were getting out as to how it operated. If you live in Los Angeles, you kind of know a lot of the secrets already. The Church of Scientology is located in Hollywood, and you've probably heard all the stories about Tom Cruise and John Travolta and all of the other people who have bought into the Church of Scientology. And you do realize, and you also heard the stories about how L. Ron Hubbard, who was a science fiction author who started a religion kind of on a dare, or it was a bet. Somebody bet him he couldn't start his own religion, and he did. I've taken a tour of the L. Ron Hubbard life exhibit on Hollywood Boulevard. It's been a couple of years, but me and a friend of mine went there to take the tour. And the idea was they were going to wait for the lobby to fill, and they'd take people through in groups, and you get to see these dioramas of L. Ron Hubbard's early life and some scenes from Battlefield Earth and how he came upon the ideas of Dianetics. We were the only 2 there. But we showed up, and it's like, hey, can we take the tour? It's like, well, usually we wait for people, but you're the only ones here. So we actually had a guide just for 2 of us leading us through this entire exhibit. So Scientology, as long as I've been alive, has always been kind of a joke. A lot of people made fun of stuff like Dianetics, but because they commanded so much money and because they were so fiercely protective as a cult, their myth still managed to grow, even though they were the subject of mockery and satire all the time. and that powerful people like Tom Cruise were in it. And from what I understand, there's this weird kind of intimidation tactic. You buy your ways into higher tiers within the Church of Scientology. It's all very money based, and it's all very ego based, like about instilling yourself with better self-esteem. It's essentially the exact opposite of what most world religions do, which is about humility. You look about Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, whatever major religion you want to look at. There's usually two basic precepts that all of them share. One of them is know thyself, and the other one is destruction of the ego. You have some humility, damn it. And the Church of Scientology is the exact opposite of that. And the Church of Scientology...
I always had a philosophy of that, because you're on the right vein. And it kind of goes with the movie itself as well. Scientology is based off of pushing your mind, Ego is something created by subconscious. It's something that, is inherent to duality of self, etc. We always have two sides of ourselves, and usually one side we're not very conscious of. But if you manipulate it, you understand it, and you push its limits, you tap into something else, which is ego. And that religion is based off what your mind can do and how far you can push it. So it makes sense that it's an ego-based type of religion.
Yeah. Well, and that's sort of to extend that a little bit further and to link it back to Beyond the Black Rainbow. The basic precept of the Church of Satanism is do what thou wilt shall be the full extent of the law. I'm certain you've heard it. The language of the Church of Satanism floats around anybody who's into horror movies or goth crap. If you look at the main character in Beyond the Black Rainbow, he is obsessed with himself, with his own mind, and he's actually been so warped by this fallen cult of service to one Lord, but to yourself mostly, and has been physically mutated and turned into a monster, and is so desperate for subservience and personal power that he's turned into essentially a horror movie villain. He's with the no hair and the black eyes, and he's essentially this murdering monster now. I think that might be the ultimate, one of the ultimate themes of what Beyond the Black Rainbow is getting at, that these cults that were based on self will only lead to the deepest, darkest, most monstrous abyss within yourself. There's not going to be there's no path to enlightenment when you essentially only have yourself to look inward on. That's something Buddhism might disagree with, but that's kind of what Beyond the Black Rainbow is stabbing toward.
Especially that scene, we're going to jump in the middle of the movie, but there's one particular scene that really always left an impression, is when he takes a drug and Dr. Arboria says, go get the mother load, right? And he drops himself in the black goo, and he has this experience which he describes as, I talk to God. There's I've seen another world. And then he was reborn, because at first he was white, and then he was reborn completely black. He was reborn with the darkest self, darkest version of himself, and that kind of, shows that in real life, and we've seen it multiple times, when you push too far, you try to understand things that our brain is not made to understand. You see things. I'm a weird one, but when I was younger, I always tried to imagine what it's like not to exist, right? When you die, if it's blackness, what is blackness? And it always freaked me out, right? So those concepts humans are not supposed to necessarily push, because our minds are not made to handle that. And when you push it too far, sometimes there are repercussions, as you can see with Barry,
Well, and I think a lot of what Beyond the Black Rainbow is getting at, though, is that he's not just pushing himself to know things that he cannot know in that Lovecraftian sort of way, that the universe is just too big to fit in your brain, and if you try, then the forces that be will kind of destroy your mind, make you go insane. I think it's that he's attempting to do this through essentially a generation removed from obviously artificial means. This is comes from a version of idealism that was not really idealism. It was all about worship in the self and having supplicants around you. And now he's the next generation along. He has no other idea as to why that philosophy would have come to be in the first place, what it's all about. He's only staggering through the idea of the cult and the drugs as being the means to achieve some sort of enlightenment. And he's not wise enough or has a broad enough perspective to understand how limited those things are, even though his brain is brushing up against infinity. Rather than sort of rising his entire brain up into the clouds, he has like a single teetering tower that can kind of scratch against it, and it's about to come collapsing down and wreck everything underneath.
But yeah, it kind of does too. It's also one thing. If we can go also in the symbolism, there's a couple of parts are made to have an emotional reaction, and some parts it's kind of in the director's head. But one part I'm always wondering, the person's interpretation is a triangle that we see probably like dampens Helena's powers, because that's one person we haven't talked about is the main character, is Helena. She's a byproduct, right, of the experimentation, right? And she's being controlled by an object. For you, what is that object?
I think it's kind of difficult to say because it's not really. It's eventually explained in a little bit more literal terms what that thing is. It's like, I mean, if you want to use like comic book language, it's like a psychic dampening field or whatever it is. And, it's dampening her psychic powers or letting her psychic powers roam free or whatever. I don't know. I think it's just, we don't need an explanation as to what it is. We just know what it does. We know it's this bizarre, mystical, technical looking object. It looks a lot like the computer from Demon Seed. And that's the thing that's controlling everything. And I think just cutting to it and then seeing the reaction is enough. That's enough for me. That's enough. I don't need any kind of literal interpretation as to what that's supposed to be.
Okay, see, I always approach it differently. I try to look at it as the symbolism of the thing, and the only thing I actually saw that clicked in my mind is the fact that, again, it's a message of duality, because often when you see it activate, you always see the reflection of it like going underneath, and you always also see two things inside of it, like two little these square or rectangle shapes inside. So it always for me reflected duality, and the heaven and hell, or in Barry's side before, and when he dived himself in the goo, he went underground, right? So it always conjured up that image for me. But you're probably right. It's probably just a triangle with dampener technology, and I smoke way too much weed for my own good.
No. I mean, I think that these films are here to be interpreted in this sort of way. So it's some sort of device. It looks like something that would have been designed in the 1960s. So I think there's a lot of just style going on with it. But the thing is also triangular. That's the symbol of the Illuminati. That little the eye of God on the top of the $1 bill in America. There's the idea of the triune God, the Trinity. So it does have kind of holy, or at least kind of mystical properties, just the triangular shape. The fact that it is pyramidal, evokes a lot. Heck, you even get like the ancient pyramidal magic, like from the pyramids of Giza. I think it's evoking all of that it is a machine that is made to look like a spiritual symbol. And I guess that's another thing that Beyond the Black Rainbow does right on the surface. It's kind of blending the spiritual and the technological. It's trying to put the God and the machine in the same place.
Yeah, no, it dives deep in a lot of messages, but in a very subtle way. For his first movie, like you said, it's a collage of multiple things, but yet at the same time, there's so much attention to detail, things that are put there, you always question why. Why did he put that much of a white filter on certain images, or why is it completely blurry and you just see forms instead of like the actual girl in the bed? But everything is put for a reason. It's so well thought out and a lot of love that it just works so well.
It works really well. It's really astonishing. It's incredibly enthralling. I used the word hypnotic already. It really just sort of draws you in, and you can't rip your eyes away. I do think that a familiarity with film history helps with something like Beyond the Black Rainbow, though. I think if you understand the kind of film that he's evoking, or the exact film that he's evoking, you might have an emotional connection that he's trying to use. I mean, if I can sort of take a complete left turn here, think about the way the Avengers films operate. By the time you're like halfway through those Avengers movies, they don't give a lot of time to exposition anymore. They don't have to reestablish who Iron Man is any longer. The filmmakers have presumed at that point that you know who that character is, or they present them in such a way that you're going to want to find out who they are, and you're going to want to do a little research and go back and watch the earlier movies. As marketing exercises that are selling an entire series, those films are first rate. And I feel like there are certain kinds of filmmakers who rely so heavily on reference that their films are maybe only going to function if you get the reference. That's the way the Avengers films work. It's like this. What does it mean at the end of Avengers Endgame that a guy in a blue suit with an A on his forehead picks up a hammer? Well, it's completely meaningless. It's just using another weapon in that scene, and it's about to be a big action sequence that means nothing. But if sort of in previous films, the allusions to what this hammer meant and who could previously use it and how powerful it is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We don't see any of that in the scene, but they've kind of grandfathered in all of those little moments into this other moment that kind of pays off in this way. You get a thrill via reference. And I feel like that's partly, and this might be the weakest aspect of Beyond the Black Rainbow, you're going to get the most out of it if you already love movies that came before it and you're already familiar with them and you've seen them. It's classic, pretentious, in quotation marks, cinema in that it has pretense. You need to have a lot of existing knowledge in order to appreciate or understand what's going on here.
And at the same time, I come from a complete opposite. I like weird movies, but I've never seen Alejandro Jodorowsky's movies before. I only discovered him actually through the documentary when he was supposed to do Dune, right? So for me, I didn't have that much exposure of that kind of movie, but I think I was predisposed to be mind blown by those messages. So that's why then I visited those kind of movies afterwards, because I was like, oh, this is amazing. What else is there like that, right? So you might not need to know all the references or like, oh yeah, that's kind of that movie. They're going for that. You have to just be that kind of film goer to understand those meanings. And that kind of like emotional,
or understand, or at least feel what's going on, kind of. And I had a very similar experience to what you're describing with Eraserhead and David Lynch's movies. I feel like David Lynch was very much more of an iconoclast. His films come more from the heart. I don't get a lot of like other film influences leaking into something like Eraserhead, the same way I do with Beyond the Black Rainbow.
No, true.
But I think there is a certain kind of film goer who is predisposed to seeking out freaky things, to understanding that cinema can kind of crack your brain open in a very important way. And thank goodness people like Panos Cosmatos are out there trying to drive that crowbar in between your cerebellum and just pry them apart.
Thank God for those. I honestly, if I would start it younger and follow my passion with movies, I'd probably be making those kind of movies, because for me, that's what important. Yes, money and fame is cool, but I always saw it as art, and if I can affect 5 people in the world, but blow their minds and be like, that was such an experience. I have to think about it from time to time. It stays in my memory. There's an echo, and I keep revisiting it because it gives me emotions and new ones and new feelings every time I watch it. That's the reason why I would make movies, and that's what I think drove him to make movies too, to affect people like me, to expand their minds.
Yeah, that's totally fair, and yeah, you can tell the kinds of films he likes, and you can tell that he's really trying to crack open a lot. Beyond the Black Rainbow is like, it's about many things. Some might call it unfocused. I know a lot of critics took issue with it when it was released, about how it doesn't seem to have one single underlying thesis. It doesn't have one thing it's commenting on. It's sort of a big bouillabaisse of reference and criticism of certain parts of culture, and these weird sort of freaky things that just seem completely surreal, to perhaps not very clear end. And I know a lot of people really disliked the fact that at the very end of the film, that we sort of exit the meditation chamber, as it were, where the rest of the film takes place. We've been completely outside of reality, and it goes out into the desert, and we meet some real people. And that kind of gives this contrast that maybe makes the world a little too stable now. We've been so deep inside the brain of this alternate world, this kind of weird, freaky science lab where there's psychic experiments and monsters and drugs and black goop and whatever, who knows what else, that saying that it's in the real world now kind of, I don't know, it makes it a little too tidy.
But at the same time, actually, that's what I appreciate about the movie, because I had to read some studies on it, and like there's a lot of thesis, like university thesis on this movie, so it made for a lot of interesting readings. And one thing I realized is Panos Cosmatos actually puts in a very short but very important part when I think that's Barry's mom he lives with. When she's sleeping, you see and you hear Ronald Reagan talk about how Russia and U.S. are about to destroy each other. They're aiming missiles at each other, etc. It shows that even with Dr. Arboria's like good intentions of trying to change the world and bring peace to us and everything, we're still trying to kill each other. It's probably still our impending doom. So that contrast of reality outside the world and what with Dr. Arboria's experiments and purpose, it made no difference. We're still gonna kill each other. We're still doomed as a human race.
Yeah. Well, and that was a big, knowing Panos Cosmatos' age, he was aware of all of that stuff that was going on in 1980s. I think it's set in 1983. Part of it was because he thought it would be funny if it was right before 1984. Isn't that a funny joke? So he remembers pretty vividly what it was like to live through that weird kind of era in the 1980s when everyone was obsessed with consumption and wealth and money and being visibly wealthy at the same time while teetering on the brink of nuclear annihilation. Everyone was really scared that the bomb was going to drop any day. You watch a lot of films and a lot of TV and read a lot of comedy, read some old Mad magazines from that era, and you'll find Reagan's face and the bomb all over all of them. If you read Watchmen, don't watch the film because the film doesn't understand this at all. But the comic book of Watchmen is all about that. It takes place in the 1980s when Nixon is still president and everything is still super duper right wing, and everything is, even though we have like a legit superhero with magical powers in this universe, we are actually only that much closer to complete annihilation. And if you've read that book, that's kind of what happens, and how the soldiers that are meant to protect us are the ones that are bringing it about. It's a really wonderful condemnation of, I think, this world annihilating military worship that was really going on in the 1980s, which Panos Cosmatos' father was feeding into with stuff like Rambo First Blood Part 2, one of the most jingoistic action films ever made. I'm not sure if he's ever come out and said that he outwardly philosophically disagrees with what his father was doing, but that's definitely something he was picking up on.
Hmm. So yeah, like, and you bring an interesting perspective. I really didn't know his dad at all, and what you're saying makes sense. It's almost feels like a rebellion, right?
In a way, yeah. We're look at what his father did. He did Rambo: First Blood Part 2. Rambo:
Hmm.
First Blood Part 2 is, it's horrifically violent. It's essentially about how we can go back and win the Vietnam War this time. It was kind of, repairing the military wounds of America. And
Hmm.
so we had this American Superman who, even though in First Blood was seen as this tragic figure, this person who was suffering from PTSD and was actually one of the forgotten wounded byproducts of the Vietnam War. For some reason, they hauled that character out of mothballs, turned him into this ultimate killing machine, the ultimate super soldier, something the character never would have done
Hmm.
in over the course of First Blood. Yeah, and turned him into just a guy with, bombs, a guy with grenades, a guy who can rip your throat out with your bare hand. Well, I know that was Roadhouse, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Uh, this very brazenly pro-Reagan, pro-military thriller that these days strikes me as being incredibly morally irresponsible, and yet really defined the 1980s in a lot of ways. And to this day, even generations hence, people have a real fondness for that kind of uh, destructive military might of Rambo. I mean, I saw Rambo Last Blood. Sylvester's in his, how old is he now? Like 91, and he's still like killing people in caves underneath his home out in the middle of nowhere. It's such a bad movie, and it's philosophically so wrong. And especially now, in 2019 when that thing came out, oh God, really? We're gonna still haul this Rambo tropes and still celebrate military violence and death, the thing that we were teetering so close to destroying the world in the 1980s? No, let's not do that anymore. Let's take a look at sort of the philosophical end of this. Let's dive into what would what strength and what power really looks like on a little bit more of a personal level, and
Hmm.
how the will to dominate others globally with nuclear war is really similar to the need of a psychic monster who doesn't really understand his own origins,
Hmm.
the next generation hence, is trying to do with an innocent talent,
Hmm.
essentially. It's about a second generation incel trying to take command of a woman's life, isn't it?
Yeah, and like she didn't ask for this. She was born into this, and that's one thing we haven't touched about is her performance. That actress and also that character, the little subtle things. She's born, let's say, almost without emotion. She can't speak. She has to speak through her mind. So she's born completely different. But you see, there's times she's struggling to just smile, to feel the emotion. So she's such an interesting character because my girlfriend like said watch it with me, and at one point she's like, "Is she ever gonna talk?" I'm like, "Nope." She's like, "Really?" She's not gonna talk. And so it must have been a very interesting casting interview, like describing the character, right? It's like you're never gonna speak. The only time you're gonna hear you speak is via voiceover. Good luck with that. But no, very interesting character. Another one that I found interesting is I know it under the music's name, but Run Program Sentinot, the tall red mouth. I never understood what the fuck that was, to be honest.
Yeah, gosh, I have no like theories about that particular symbol, unfortunately. But other than to say it's just another fun visual, kind of half remembered from science fiction movies over the past.
Mm.
I did remember reading an interview where Panos Cosmatos admitted that a
Sorry
lot
about
of oh, no worries. A lot of what he was trying to recreate with this movie was the experience he had in his head of wandering through a video store and looking at video film covers, like the VHS boxes,
that. Okay.
which had really interesting artwork, and trying to make the film that he thought those films were.
Huh.
Like, because when you look at a film poster, it gives you a sort of a good idea in your head as to what that movie is going to be. And of course, that's not necessarily the movie on the inside. Panos Cosmatos remembers looking at a lot of those video boxes and going through video stores in the early 1980s and seeing all of these freaky science fiction and horror covers. And I think he's trying to create the movie that you get in your brain while you're browsing. So it is a very, very postmodern media deconstructionist kind of movie.
And that's just brilliant. That excites me. Hearing that is such a unique way and makes so much sense if you think about it. Your brain goes somewhere by itself sometimes, just by images. So no, that's really cool.
So it's, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, it's a little odd because he's making this movie, which is very much a deconstruction, very much an attack on stuff like Scientology, but in general, the way the baby boomer generation had toward sort of alternate spiritualities following the war. That's when Scientology and a lot of these alternate, like, little miniature new religions started popping up. These little cults of personality that were very self-based. And he seems to be maybe not saying, but definitely implying unintentionally that these cults of the self, these alternate occult skewing pseudo-religions that were forming in the baby boomers generation and how their idealism was kind of mutating, has been maybe replaced with a worship of media. He himself is now of a generation that was grown up so heavily with media that those are the only frames of references he has now. And that, of course, was the plight of his generation. He's Generation X. And I guess I'm still Generation X. I was born in 1978. Maybe I'm Generation Y. However you want to put it. It doesn't really matter. But if you look at Generation X, however, you look at, and this is going to be another weird parallel, look at the robots from Mystery Science Theater 3000. These were, keep in mind, a human being on that show, a human being was shot into space and he was forced to watch the worst movies ever made. And the only thing he could do to survive was to make jokes. And he made companions. And he made these robots. Now, what were the robots programmed with? They don't have a childhood. They don't have a life. They don't have experiences watching all of these movies necessarily. They have a repository of popular culture as their childhood. That's all they have. That's their personality is they know these movies, and you won't see them watch the movies on Mystery Science Theater. All they do is, crack wise and make a lot of jokes about, Mark Singer from V, or to cite one completely random example. Panos Cosmatos, people my age, the people who are on the internet, film Twitter, film criticism today, are all several generations hence from the origin of complete and utter media saturation. I mean, media, television became big in the 1950s. It threatened movie theaters. There wasn't a time when we were all kind of hooked up to screens all the time. It became really bad in the 1980s, probably because of Ronald Reagan. There was a law that was passed sometime in the late 80s, but it was kind of crumbling for a while, about how it was illegal to market certain kinds of entertainment directly to children. You couldn't. That's why Mickey Mouse isn't on cereal boxes. They didn't want kid-friendly mascots to be used for marketing purposes. So, of course, all the cereal companies just came up with their own cartoon characters. And as such, kids who are raised in the 1980s are seeing these commercials where commercials and cartoons, they're kind of interchangeable, of these brave heroes that are also a toy. You're going to watch the cartoon, and then you run down to the toy store and you also buy the toy. And the toy is actually where they're making all of the money. The cartoons are just glorified commercials. And unfortunately, that's warped a lot of brains of people my age to the point where all they can think of the media is the means by which they got their way of thinking. The idea that everything kind of interconnects, and now we can have our heroes on the TV and in the toy store. And in fact, these are the most important things in the world to us, that we have these movies and we have to follow these mythologies. Media, consumed popular media, is the new Illuminati figure in the mind of Panos Cosmatos.
Huh. Wow. I am so happy to pick your brain, Whitney. I would have never thought what you just brought that. Wow. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a theory, just given what I know about what Beyond the Black Rainbow is about and the age of the filmmaker, and how it is stylistically presented to us. It is really kind of a regurgitation in a lot of ways. And that was the fate of Generation X. We were fed on the media of the previous generation. All we had was media. You watch something like Fight Club, you hear a lot of screeds from Generation X being spoken out loud, how there was no great war to unify this particular generation. We didn't have one singular ethos. We were disaffected. That's all we had. Our disaffection was sort of the thing. So everybody became kind of snarky and ironic. I'm not sure if you ever saw somebody wearing a T-shirt with like the Tide logo on it. It's like, well, clearly the person who's wearing that shirt doesn't really like Tide, which is, laundry detergent. They're wearing it because they're kind of ironically commenting on the fact that advertising is everywhere. So I may as well just wear an advertisement. And isn't this funny? Now advertising has no power. So I think, what he's really getting at here unintentionally is revealing how people his age can only communicate via pastiche. It's a theory. It's a theory. Of course, other filmmakers have done it. You look at Godard, there's a whole different sort of historical through line that leads to the way Jean-Luc Godard saw movies and the way he was writing about movies and the way he was writing movies in the 1960s. And same with Quentin Tarantino. But Quentin Tarantino is also Generation X, technically. So they're all kind of feeding from the same idea that everything needs to be a reference to something else. And I feel like Beyond the Black Rainbow, being as reference heavy as it is starting to blend symbolically, and maybe not even by the director's intent, into an argument that our worship of media has come to replace those empty cults of yesteryear.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like it does. Like, look at social media, look at everything surrounding us, right? You can't avoid it. It's, if you've never heard of Twitter, it's because like you lived under a rock or you just came from space, you can't escape it. So it is everywhere. It is like the laboratory itself. It is its own prison.
Yeah. We're all trapped in our own prisons, and I feel like when we run into, and maybe this was Panos Cosmatos' ego speaking, but when we run into somebody who is truly mentally free, that is to say, really creative, really honestly deeply spiritual, really intellectually powerful, or just emotionally honest in a way we're not comfortable with because it falls outside of the purview of cult worship or media worship, we feel really threatened by that. We feel a need to control it. Just look at a conversation you might have on Twitter. It was released today that Zack Snyder is finally going to be able to finish his Justice League movie. First of all, I don't care. I don't like Zack Snyder movies. But if I say I don't like Zack Snyder movies, people come at me, attack me for that kind of crap.
I like it, but I understand why you wouldn't. It's so detached and but I like it, but I understand.
Kind of lost my train. But if so, yeah, the idea is when somebody presents you with sort of a new idea, your new idea is to, your instinct, your reaction is to dominate, is to overrule them, is to not seek personal power, but to express your power via domination. And that's very much what Beyond the Black Rainbow is about, because we have this young woman. She has psychic powers. She essentially is a success. The experiment worked. She is a new generation. Call her a millennial, if you will. She's the one who has developed all of these powers. She's the result of everything that we've tried in the past. She has everything she needs. She's an original thinker. And the only thing this guy can think to do is dominate her with the only tools he knows, or is to control her with the only tools he knows, and the tool is domination.
And especially that I think Arboria's main goal was actually well intentioned. It is a noble thing to try, but it fell afterwards in the hands of someone that was not pure and did not have the right intentions, especially after being reborn as this black figure. But I don't think Arborio actually knew what he was doing, and the control that he gave him, and would be, the downfall of his experiment because he gave that control,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to come up with sort of the analog of that. I suppose it's like a parent who works really, really hard and has to struggle and fight through wars and work really cheap jobs and work really, really hard so they can provide for their family, right? They can create a better future for their child, a future where that child doesn't have to struggle in quite the same way. And then the child, not having the same experience as the parent, actually has things a lot easier now because the parent struggled that much, but then the parent starts to resent that they didn't have to struggle, even though that was the goal all along. It's like, oh, I just want to laze around. Things are so hard for me because my school is kind of hard and my friends don't treat me well. And the parent just says, if you knew what it was like to fight in wars at age 15, it's like, no, you did that specifically so that kid wouldn't have to. So, and that's another relationship going on and beyond the Black Rainbow. We have this child who actually has worked out. Their lives are better now because of these experiments. And now all that's resulted is resentment.
So you're pretty spot on with the kid and the parent analogy. Hey, I've been there. To be honest, I've been that idiot kid that does not understand what my dad went through and took it for granted. At least I grew up and actually, at one point, life hits you and be like, okay, you know what? I understand what he meant. It took me 15 years. I'm slow, but I get it, But Barry never did. He was always just so focused in the hate. And there's one thing I read, and it kind of makes sense, and it's something that kind of like hit me right, especially this time, because now I've been in sexology in university. There's things that pop. He's sexually repressed. There's some very deep, dark passenger when it comes to his sexuality, because you can see instances. One is when the nurse or whatever she is finds the diary, right, and goes through. At the end, there's more and more sexual, darker stuff. And at the end, when he kills the two campers, the second one, he kind of projects his sexual fears. You fucked her, did you? But that's what he was feeling for himself. He probably wanted so deep to do something sexually and he never could. So it's a very interesting dive into his character.
An atheist friend of mine once said that guys need to get laid, otherwise they do stupid things like start religions. This whole, I think that goes back to a lot of what those New Age cults were about, though. They were very much about the self, but at the same time, there was this weird streak of anti-sexuality folded into them, and that might have been part of the paranoia of just sort of 1950s America, how everything became super right-wing and puritanical at that particular point in history. So there was a lot of fear of sex and sexuality. Things weren't talked about. Imagine how fun it was to be a gay man in 1950. Good God. But yeah, I think that's something that it was really kind of folded into a lot of that, and why I think a lot of them might have ultimately failed was these cults, was this idea that humanity could be controlled. And I really apologize for this, but I'm going to have to bring up Friedrich Nietzsche now. Because whenever I when I say, and to quote Friedrich Nietzsche, that's when everybody says, okay, I'm out. I'm not listening to you anymore. No. But yeah, with Friedrich Nietzsche, he was talking about sort of the will to power. That was one of his key phrases. And Will to Power was about sort of being stronger, being the best self you can be, being strong from within, and not relying on anybody else. It is you who are the most important thing. Focus on making yourself the strongest mind, the smartest person, the wisest thing, the best philosopher, and really fuck all the other systems. And a lot of people took Nietzsche's words and thought, well, in order to prove my strength, I have to dominate. And we have already talked about how one of the central themes going through Beyond the Black Rainbow is domination.
Mm. Yeah, and I never understood that philosophy, because to grow, to have the most intelligent minds, you have to learn from others. Like, your self-contained experience is only one of many directions, many positions you can put yourself to grow, you know. So only relying on what you lived through, you think you're smart and you know everything, but you actually like cut yourself off and be stupid in a certain facet, because that's the only thing you know. It's the only thing you convinced yourself without any experience, without any, you know, I can't say that word. Juxtaposition.
Juxtapose.
Thank you. Thank God you have a basis in French, apparently. You can understand where I'm going at. To juxtapose other experiences and coming up to new conclusions. Because that's where at one time you go mad, when you only self-rely on things you almost invent to yourself at one point, because you have no other experiences.
Well, and also it discounts the idea that if you're living in a society with other people, and you live in a home, and you live in this entirely complicated community, that your very existence is actually because that community exists. This idea that you're completely self-reliant, but you have to pay like plumbing bills, and you have to make sure that you get into cars that were made by other people. You're reliant on this entire system that has spent centuries building itself, and to think that you're standing on top of this gigantic tower that was built by others and think that you are the one who made it there is completely absurd to me. We need more philosophies that are about communities, about others, about gentleness. We need frankly the kinds of thinking that Beyond the Black Rainbow seems to be seems to be saying that a certain generation has deliberately forgotten, and that is the actual ideas of a lot of old-timey religions, which is community and love and mental purity and thinking clearly and meditation. All of these things that were kind of filtering down through these cults and being misinterpreted over the generations. Let's get back to sort of a little bit more of the original intent, at least philosophically, and that will help us.
Yeah, but humans, we have a tendency just to bring out the worst. We got some good. Thank God we got good people in the world, right? That can push through positivity. But especially with today's climate, we sometimes lose faith in humanity, and it's sad, but it's the reality of it all. That being said, look, this was profound, Whitney. Thank you very much. This warmed my heart, man. Be able to talk about this movie, man. That this means a lot to me.
Yeah, well, no, I got to talk about a lot of things that just sort of interest me personally, which was nice. But yeah, you chose a good meaty one that has a lot of good, interesting ideas in it that extends into cinema and philosophy in interesting ways. If you want to have me back for Mandy, I am 100% down, because Mandy is amazing.
There's two movies I want to cover with you: Mandy and Rubber from Quentin Dupieux. I don't know if you like it or not, but there's so much of a talk about like the people are watching what's happening is also is a metaphor for the actual audience, and the whole monologue of why, these are things I want to go deep into it with you too.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much to be on, Whitney. Stay safe. Okay. I hope to see you soon.
Of course. Take care. Thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful pleasure.
All right. Take care, bro. And ending in 3.